I'm Darren McCarthy.
I'm Dan Fury.
And this is The Fundamentals. Special guest today,
Mr. Neil Hunt.
He's bringing some expert knowledge.
About the topic of which is...
strokes.
Yeah. And Neil here had a stroke.
Which is remarkable to me.
Yep.
Thanks for joining us.
No problem.
First off, what really is a stroke?
Well, I did some
speaking.
research on this. There are essentially two types of stroke. One is called ischemic and one's called hemorrhagic. The ischemic is something like 85% of strokes, the vast majority, and that's it's a clot. So it's buildup of cholesterol, like fatty tissue stuff inside your arteries that cause and then eventually, clots up a whole blood vessel in the brain, and then blood can't get to like downstream into the brain. So that can happen. There's essentially three different main arteries into the brain: the posterior, posterior carotid artery. I forget what the middle one is called, but then like anterior, and then those blood vessels that branch throughout the brain. So the clot can, in theory, form at anywhere in there. It can also be something like a clot that starts in the heart. Like if you have a heart attack or some sort of cardiovascular disease, maybe your heart isn't like pumping properly or pumping all the way, or
getting a good pump.
Yeah, you're not getting a good pump, and then the blood will clot in there. It's not getting like squeezed and forced out of there. And then that clot could just travel through and then just lodge up into an artery in the brain, or it could just be stuff slowly building up in the arterial walls in the brain. And then when that happens, blood is no longer getting downstream into the part of the brain is trying to service. And then from there, that part of the brain will be damaged.
Yeah.
Depending on what part of the brain it is, it might be your motor function, like memory. I mean, whatever part of the brain that it controls will be affected.
And sometimes it gets better over time.
There are these transient, almost like mini strokes that only occur for 24 hours or so. Like and you might even really recognize it as a stroke, as the person, unless you went to a doctor.
Yeah, there was a famous news reporter actually that had one. They call them TIAs. I forget what it stands for exactly, but yeah, those are really interesting. They kind of like are a mini one.
Yeah.
And people are actually making fun of her on that newscast. It's on YouTube, I'm sure.
She did it on air?
Yeah, it was like on air. It happened. It was crazy. Like
transient ischemic attack.
Yeah.
It's almost like there's a bunch of plaque or buildup, but then it starts forming a clot or blockage in the artery, and then it will just dissolve on its own, or like it'll just pass through. So you kind of starting to have a stroke. We're going down this road, and then for whatever reason, it just clears itself. The amount of time is really critical, because when you have the clot and the brain isn't getting the adequate amount of blood, neurons in the brain, they start to die within 4 minutes. You see that a lot, even in like the literature or like PSAs about it now. It's like every second counts. These are the signs of a stroke. You need to get this person.
What do you do?
Rush them to the ER. I mean,
what can be done? What is it that you have to do to alleviate the...
I think you get some blood thinners going in there. I'm not sure. I mean, it might be emergency surgery, depending on what kind of stroke it is. Because we talked about the ischemic, which is the vast majority is a clot of some kind, either starting in the heart or just building up in the brain itself. The other kind is the hemorrhagic, which is, there might be, so you have these arteries in your brain, and there might be a weakness or deficiency in the artery wall. And where that artery is weaker, it'll start bulging out. Like it just can't hang on to the pressure anymore of the blood. So you kind of get this little balloon that pops out. And you might have this forever. You don't even know it's there, and it doesn't affect you at all. Nothing ever happens.
That's the scariest thing. They seem so stealthy.
Yeah.
It can happen at any time, no matter how healthy you are or think you are.
Yep. And if that little bulge ruptures, then it's a hemorrhagic stroke. So then you have blood leaking into your brain.
Ugh.
The similar danger is there's no longer blood getting to the part of the brain it's supposed to be getting to, but then the secondary issue is now you have a buildup of fluid in your brain that's just causing pressure and all the other mechanisms in there. So it's really serious.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things that It is the National Stroke Organization. They recommend the FAST thing as the acronym that you should remember. Mm-hmm. It's face, arms, speech, and time. So a lot of times people's faces will sag on one side and droop on one side. The other thing is if somebody can't raise their left arm, but they can raise their right arm, that's definitely a huge sign. Speech, if they have slurred speech and you're like, what's wrong with you? Are you just like drunk? Or sometimes that's actually a sign of a stroke, and then those people need to be taken to the hospital. So
stroking out. Yeah. So it usually affects one side of the brain?
It can, and if it does, say if it's on the left side of your body, the right side of your body will be affected. You can kind of pinpoint where it is in the brain, There's a lot of different causes. It could be, just something genetic, hereditary, like you have, or cardiovascular disease that runs in your family. I think particularly with men, if there's a history of cardiovascular disease, you're at higher risk. If there's a history of stroke in general, you're at a higher risk. Some of the chemicals in like cigarettes can increase your chances. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, those will all contribute.
Isn't stroke one of the top few leading causes of death in America?
I'm not sure where it ranks. It's not necessarily, fatal every time. And I think there's a whole spectrum of effect. I wouldn't be surprised if it was one of the more common maladies or symptoms, or I don't know, what would be the word for
that? Like
health
events?
Health event, yeah, that's a good. I wouldn't be surprised if it's really a super common one.
Feels like it is, and it feels like it's something that you're always warned about when you're talking about nutrition and overall quality of life, because this, and these things will contribute to strokes, cancer,
I have it
heart
actually
disease.
Here. So each year, nearly 800,000 people experience a new or recurrent stroke.
That's a lot.
Stroke is the 5th leading cause of death in the U.S. So every 4 minutes, someone dies from a stroke.
Whoa.
Up to 80% of strokes can be prevented.
That's interesting.
Do you have like the lineup to heart attacks? Do heart attacks rank higher?
I can find out real quick.
I'm sure.
Because when a lot of people ask what it is, because they'll ask me, well, what is that? The simplest explanation that I give people is it's basically a heart attack that happens in your brain and not your heart. Mm-hmm. It's very similar.
That makes sense. For some reason, I wasn't thinking of it like that.
Yeah, it's just different.
It can be directly related to a heart attack too. So I think so. You might have this heart attack where your heart is still functioning, but it's been damaged or weakened, or like some ventricle is not pumping correctly. So okay, you survived the heart attack.
Yeah.
But now the long-term symptom or situation may be we're on the road to a stroke at this point. Yeah.
That happened to my grandfather. He had a quadruple bypass, and then about 8 years later, he had a stroke.
Mm-hmm.
And he was okay, but he never was quite the same. He was slower on the uptake. He just wasn't as sharp, and you could tell it really frustrated him because he was trying to think of the thing or the name or the event, and frustration was constant.
I have some heart disease general facts here. So it's leading cause of death for both men and women. Every year, about 785,000 Americans have a first coronary attack. Another 470,000 who have already had one or more attacks have another attack. So you have over 1 million people, most of them for the first time, but quite a few for the second time, are having a heart attack. As of 2008, so it's kind of older data, but 616,000 people died of heart disease. Yeah, so it's almost as many deaths as there are just strokes in general, which is quite a bit.
So if 80% of them can be prevented, what is the criteria for preventing them?
Keeping your blood pressure low, cholesterol low, don't smoke. I mean, a lot of
pretty much the same stuff as to keep your heart healthy.
Yeah, definitely go hand in hand. And if you have a history of it, I think you need to have that on your mind.
Don't eat like an idiot.
Yep. Don't eat like you're not going to have a stroke.
Yeah.
That'll never happen.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your stroke, Mr. Hunt.
Sure.
It seems like it was an unusual occurrence. I mean, there really was no sign of it coming, and it was more of a kind of a fluke.
Yeah. So mine happened when I was 28.
Yeah.
So I'll just walk you through the timeline. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. So it was Friday, typical Friday. Went out, for a couple of beers with some coworkers. It was like 6:30 or something. I was like 1.5 beers in. I was sitting like a table, a small table. We were splitting in a bottle of some really hoppy beer, and next thing I know, it was really, really odd. I remember like I could hear people far away, and they sounded like they were close, and then the people that were closest to me sounded like they were at the end of the room.
So weird.
Mm-hmm.
My brain was having a really hard time focusing on everything, and the only thing that I could think of was that I gotten drugged. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense because I'm around 3 people that are all friends. Like, this doesn't make any sense. So I just called a cab out of like self-preservation. I was like...
So that's what you thought at the
moment. Yeah, I was just like, I don't know what's going on. I guess I should just go home. And, so I called a cab. And I remember like drifting in and out of just like confusion of like where I was. I knew how to get home, obviously. It was like a 10-minute drive. And I kind of remember like waking up, like I wasn't asleep, but I remember kind of like waking up and being like, turn right and then like turn left. Like, cause I didn't even give him my address. I was just like, yeah, go this way. He was like, I could tell he was
so
like,
you directed him home even though.
Yeah. Like it was really odd. Like I wasn't drunk, but I just was like out of it in a weird state. Right. And I got home.
Do you think he thought you were just drunk?
I think he thought I was drunk because he picked me up from a bar.
Right.
So, I think he did say something like, do you need me to take you to the hospital or something? I was like, nah, I'm fine. Because I was like, I really didn't know what was going on. And I got home to my roommates and it was like, 6:45. And they were like, wow, you're really, like, they just assumed that I was drunk. They're like, oh, it was Friday night. You got really drunk. But they kind of were like, that's odd for you to be that drunk this early. And so I kind of like threw up and then like went to bed. And
sleep it off.
Even if I could go to the doctor that night, which I should have done, I don't know what like, I don't even know how I could make that happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, I was just like out of it. I mean, in retrospect, obviously I should have went.
Yeah, but you're 28. You're fairly, at that point, you were doing jujitsu?
Yeah, I was training a lot.
I remember you were in a good state of health. So why would you assume?
I was actually going through all my medical records and I was like, I was 181 pounds when I weighed in there. And so like, it's in really good shape, actually. Yeah. When they woke up, they're like, what was with you last night? Like, you were like drunk. And I was like, no, I only had 1.5 beers. They're like, what? And I was like, yeah. And I've got like this headache and kind of like all the way through the day, I just like kept feeling worse and worse. And around 8:00, my roommate was like, let's go to the hospital. Let's see what's going on with you. So we went to OHSU. I got intaked into there, and they basically assumed I had meningitis or the flu, and they discharged me with the flu. And
it's another thing when we were talking about cancer and the frustration of going to the doctor and then not knowing what is actually wrong with you.
Yeah, when I
sent him home.
When I had Lyme disease, came in, and you know, with Lyme, it presents as like a really bad flu.
Yeah,
and but I'm from New England, and it's common up there, they're
hella ticks.
And, so the doctors are a little bit, that's on their mind. They're ready to kind of recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
But I took the Lyme disease test, which is notoriously, it's like 60% accurate. You could take it 10 times and get 50-50 results. And they said, well, it's either viral meningitis, could be bacterial meningitis, but you'd probably be dead because it's been a couple days. Some sort of brain infection.
Yeah.
Just general brain infection, could be
just
HIV,
a general infection of your brain.
HIV, AIDS, or it could be Lyme disease. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna
go Lyme disease.
That sounds.
Let's explore this Lyme disease a little bit more. But then they just sent me home. All right, so it's one of these 5 things, none of which is great.
No,
but it ended up being Lyme. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. So
they send you home.
So they send me home, but. Mind you, I could not keep any liquids or foods down. Okay. So I was severely dehydrated. And I felt like, you never been really dehydrated where like your body just feels crampy? Mm-hmm. Like it just hurt to move. I was also dizzy. It felt like I was on like a dock after getting off of a boat that's been out on the ocean for like days. It was bad. So there's all kinds of things going on. But when I did get there, what they did give me, which was one of the best things they did, was give me a crap load of saline. Mm-hmm. So they injected saline in me and gave me a spinal tap to determine if I had meningitis, because that's what they assumed based off of my age and kind of how things were going. So they discharged me. I ended up getting a cab home. It was like this weird thing because it took like 2-3 hours to determine that I had the flu, which is incorrect.
That is incredible.
And then I ended up taking a cab home just because it was like 1 a.m. in the morning. And then like I felt legitimately a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, maybe it was just the flu. I don't know. This is odd.
Yeah.
But I still in my head, I thought I got drugged. Like still like maybe I got the flu, but like I was like in my head, I was like, this just nothing quite adds up. Yeah. And then so all day Sunday, I was just in pain, lying on the couch, like dizzy, started throwing up again, started getting really dehydrated again. And so Monday morning, we went into the urgent care. And the gals at urgent care like kind of heard my whole story. They heard the timeline. And they're like, how about you just drive to the ER right now? And I was like, what? And they're like, that kind of got me alerted and like kind of scared. So we drive to the ER. She called ahead. They got me in. So I didn't really have to wait too long in the ER, which was really nice. And I remember the nurse there asked me, she goes, what's your pain like? And I had literally been in there. I actually got all my medical history after this just to like, for fun, not too far after because I wanted to look at all the x-rays and everything. Because I broke my clavicle there. And I was like, well, I've been in for a clavicle injury and that feels like a 6, but I said it was a 10 at the time. So I'm going to say that this is a 10 now. Like now I know what a 10 is like. My head hurts so bad. And it was mainly because of the brain swelling is what happens, which is actually one of the biggest reasons that people go into the ER for a stroke is pain because your brain really hurts when it swells. Like that's another one of the problems is your brain swells and that can cause damage to additional cells. There was like this sense of relief when I actually got like into like the bed and like actually had a real doctor there that there was just a sense that he actually felt competent. Like I felt like he knew what he was doing. I don't know. Like, and I never got that sense at the other place. Yeah. And I don't know how to like. I don't know how to describe that. There's just this feeling that some doctors have this level of like, you just feel like they're advocating for you. I don't know how to like describe it, but this guy felt like he was on it, and he ordered an MRI. They got the MRI done, and they're like, well, it looks like you had a stroke. And I was like, I mean, what? My brain, I was like, what? Like, huh? What's a stroke? How? Like, how does this happen? What is this? And I had like a million questions, but by then I was pretty well drugged up. So it was scary, but at the same time, it was relieving. It was relieving that at least we know what the hell's going on and we don't have some mysterious flu symptom going on. So
move forward.
So yeah, that was kind of the start of that. And then,
so what was the cause of it?
I had a vertebral artery dissection, which, when he was describing the two different kinds, there's the, what is it, hemorrhagic
and ischemic.
An ischemic. I had an ischemic one.
Okay. And that's the less common one.
That's the most common.
Most common. Yeah, the hemorrhagic ones where the blood vessel actually bursts. And he described there was like 3 main arteries that feed your brain. So the vertebral artery goes through it actually goes through one of your bones in your neck. It kind of like curves up in there and it's like really like tucked in there. So that thing, what the doctors described was like a rubber band. So like there's kind of an inner and outer rubber band of your artery, like so it flexes as you move and you look. So the inner wall and the outer wall like separated, and your body tries to repair that by creating a blood clot, which then the blood clot broke off and went into my cerebellum, which so that created cerebral infraction, which is where there's a blockage in your cerebrum. Or cerebellum, rather, my cerebellum. And that is like the reptilian part of your brain. So it's not the left or the right. It's like this old part of your brain that's responsible for motor control, balance, finer movement, I guess, is another usage for it.
I have a good diagram here.
Ooh.
You can see the vertebral artery. Is that red one there, kind of tucked in among the bones?
Okay.
Yep.
That's probably where you were.
Yeah, it was like right in here, like right on the neck where it happened, and then the clot went up to the cerebellum there. So basically, what happened though is they said about a third of my cerebellum's dead. So
I remember you telling me that, like, oh shit.
I mean, the cerebellum. People who have strokes in their left side or the right side, like that's why they do the arm thing, right? Because that makes like sense. But for the cerebellar stroke, the only thing you can really know is if you have a lack of balance, which is kind of odd. Like it's kind of hard to diagnose that particular one. So I kind of had like this unicorn of strokes. Vertebral artery dissections are pretty rare, but they're actually getting fairly common according to the doctors.
And wait, what caused that to begin with?
Nobody knows.
It's just something.
Yeah, he said it's like a rubber band, and like sometimes that rubber band just breaks.
My assumption was that it could have been caused in the physical activity that he was involved in, because it was fairly
Yeah. So I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah.
So there's lots of, strangulation, chokeholds that do happen. But that particular artery is so tucked in there.
It's within bone in there too.
Right.
I feel like
you'd
probably be dead if someone was squeezing on your neck.
That
hard.
Yeah, but I don't know exactly what it would be, but that's just a lot of like twisting and like
it could also just be that
movements.
Your particular artery was shorter and tighter to begin with.
It could be it too.
They're not all the same length.
Right.
Yeah, the doctor. He said it happens to like. He said it's actually fairly common in women too. So it's not like usually a sports type injury that would cause that. So he was just like, he goes, you could have just looked to the left because there was a pretty girl across the room, and it can just happen, bloop, and that's it.
That's so weird.
So it was kind of unsettling knowing that like there's just all this stuff that could just fail at any time in your body. Like it's kind of scary.
Freaked me out at the time because we're pretty much the same age. And like, what? I mean, it kind of made sense. My grandfather had a stroke when he was in his 70s.
Mm-hmm.
But one of my best friends, who's my age, ugh.
Some of the stats on that, though, it is so typically associated with like an age thing. But a third of all strokes happen to people under 65. So it's not.
Wow.
It's not just once you're in your 70s, that's when it's going to start affecting you. And atherosclerosis, which is essentially like the hardening of the arteries, like the plaque buildup within the artery wall, that can start in childhood.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. And then it might, once you hit your 20s, it will really pick up steam. So that could have been something else. That's what I was assuming you were going to say. It's kind of funny.
No. So actually, they tested I think it's the LCL levels and one of the other like cholesterol levels, and the guy was like, "Yours are insanely low." Like they're like, "I don't think that has a factor at all because they would expect a higher LCL." Like, but mine was very unique.
It's not really something that you could have prevented.
True.
Like in this case,
yeah, and I think I guess for me, like I kind of wish more people knew about the symptoms of like, so obviously, it's exercise and diet and all that stuff, to help prevent it. But when it does happen, like it took me 3 days to like actually get real help.
Yeah.
And I'd always just wonder like how much better off I'd be had none of that. If it would have been recognized sooner,
the first time.
Instead of going home from the bar, you'd gone straight to the ER.
Yeah, like I always think about that. Like would I have, a sixth of my cerebellum dead instead of a third?
So is that still the case, or did that improve?
It becomes necrotic, basically. Like that part of your brain will never get blood again.
Huh.
Once those neurons die, they're
pretty much dead. Yeah.
So what was the prognosis for you in the future, if that was the case? Did they say that your brain will kind of redirect things in order to correct, like your balance, your sense of balance, and stuff like that?
By the time I could walk when I got into the ER, I was in the hospital for 5 days after that. And then what happened was like after, like your brain's still like healing and dealing with it. Like it's a long road to recovery. And I was in the hospital for 5 days, and when I got discharged, I could barely walk.
Yeah.
I was actually kind of better off when I went in than when I got out, if that makes sense from like a livability perspective. Like obviously it was good for me to go in, when I did, but coming out of it, like it was like worse, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I obviously I didn't have like a massive headache anymore, and I could keep food down, which was really nice. But I literally kind of had to reteach myself how to walk.
Yeah.
It was pretty bad.
It seems like it didn't take all that long, though, in order for you to get back to some normalcy.
Yeah,
it was actually pretty surprising.
Yeah, my boss actually visited me in the hospital, and they were able to like enroll me immediately into like so like from a financial perspective, it was kind of nice because they enrolled me into like a, I forget what it is, like a emergency leave act or whatever. Like so I basically got paid like a week after. There was pretty much no overlap in my paycheck, but I ended up staying with my aunt for like a month and a half, 2 months, and she would drive me to my physical therapy appointments, and it just took a while to get kind of back up into reality. It was crazy. I remember the first time being in public, and I was like, "Oh my god, things are weird."
Yeah.
So,
but sometimes I just forget that happened because I don't see it in you anymore, which is very thankful.
like now most people can't even tell. I ride motorcycles. I actually still do jujitsu. It hasn't stopped me. I'm kind of just as good as I was before, although there's still times when I raise my head up really fast. I mean, I think this happens to people that just get older in general, but like there's times when I definitely feel like when I was younger, I definitely wouldn't feel off balance here. But but yeah, it's just kind of more like a balance kind of thing where I'm like, this feels weird. I know that my body's tilted to the left, but it feels like I'm straight. Like it's weird. Yeah.
So I know that the risk of a second stroke after you've had one is really high.
Yeah, that's what.
It's like 10 times. You're 10 times more likely to have another stroke. But with that kind of stroke that you had, is that it's not like you had cardiovascular disease and your heart is still messed up and producing plaque.
Yeah, that was like because they gave me they basically kind of give you a packet of documentation when you leave generally, and all that documentation kind of had like all this stuff like 30% of people who had a stroke in what is it like 6 months have another one, and then like they give you all these percentages after years, and it's been 6 years now. Knock on wood, I haven't had another one, so that's really great for me. But I think because of the way that mine happened, I've just been really lucky, I guess. I mean, I was unlucky, but lucky.
It's really unlucky in the first place.
If you're going to have a stroke, it's
I guess have one of these ones. Yeah. I don't know. Wouldn't advise anyone to have
just
a stroke.
Avoid them as much as you can.
Yeah, life is like golf. You want to have as little strokes as possible. Yeah, so that's one of my great jokes. Yeah.
Yeah, I have just some of the general prevention tips. It's stuff we already said. I mean, just keeping your blood pressure low, keep your cholesterol low, quit smoking, just diet and exercise. I mean, because I think the vast majority of it is that fatty plaque buildup. It kind of goes along just with
it's just good sense.
Generally healthy lifestyle for most people. I think what you had, it didn't really matter. But
yeah, it was very odd.
It was more just a mechanical failure rather than like a lifestyle thing. It wasn't like a diet thing. It was more.
Yeah, so it was very odd too because I remember because I think I had like 6 CT scans in the course of 6 months just because like you're going through all these things and they want to like check you over time. And I remember there was one technician that was looking at the scan and he was like, "Oh, that looks really interesting." It looked like it was like bubbling out a bit, like because that's what they look for people who are going to have the hemorrhagic strokes. And it like got me super like I was super nervous. And then the real doctor comes by and it's like, "Oh no, don't worry about that. That's nothing." And I was like, "Is he just trying to make me feel good, or like what's going on?" Sometimes being a patient, like it's tough, when you've had something like that happen, you get really like paranoid about things. I guess
I bet
definitely is up to my level of anxiety. Just when things don't feel right, it's like, wait a minute, what's going on?
Yeah. Darren, you and I were talking about panic attacks not too long ago, and I told you about his situation, and that when I had my first real one, it had only been a year and a half maybe since his event, and I was like, oh shit. I did have some like disassociative sensations, and I did check my balance and whether or not I was uneven in my response and stuff like that. And I knew I wasn't having a stroke, but it still was like the foremost thought. Like, what is happening to my brain? If it could happen to him, it could happen to me. It's definitely made me self-conscious about that kind of stuff.
After doing this research in your story as well, my grandmother had a stroke. I mean, it's definitely in my family. It's like, yeah, why not? It's not an age-specific thing, clearly.
Yeah.
Could just kind of happen.
Hey.
Just another warm, fuzzy thought here on the fundamentals. Man.
Oh, boy. So you've talked about Jill Bolt Taylor a few times. She was a neuroscientist?
Yeah, she's the one that did the TED Talk, right?
Yeah.
On I think it's called like My Stroke of Insight or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah, hers is really interesting. She had like the full like left, I think it was like the left side of her brain that was affected. So she had more of like called a traditional stroke. I think like in her story, she like tried picking up the phone and like trying to call people, and like she kept calling somebody over and over and she couldn't talk, but like she in her brain, she thought she was talking.
Explaining everything.
And so whoever she was calling, ended up calling the police or something to go and check on her.
because she was so familiar with the brain and how it works and how a stroke happens, consciously experiencing the stroke and recognizing it, but still tripping out because her brain's all bonkers. So to hear her recant that story is pretty interesting. Have you seen that TED Talk?
No. What was her name?
Jill Bolt Taylor.
Okay.
I think she's written a book as well.
I've got a link to it too.
We'll put that up.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Very interesting insight.
I think that a lot actually with this kind of thing, strokes or heart attacks, being so common in general. A lot of people that know a lot about it must get affected as well.
Like, oh fuck, I'm having a heart attack and I'm in the middle of the desert.
Like I'm on
a hike,
like I'm a heart specialist and I'm having a heart attack and I know that I'm having a heart attack. And then that's okay. How would if I was my own doctor, what would I recommend doing here? Like, how would I get out of the situation? That's got to be terrifying too, because you know the severity of it.
Yeah,
no
doubt.
Know what the stroke's going to be.
Yeah, I'm sure. Like even in the medical profession, that people, that are heart doctors, they may actually end up working on their coworkers at some point in their career.
Was that I think it was I don't know if he was. I think he's a neuroscientist, but he was doing research on the brains of sociopaths or psychopaths, and so he's doing all these scans of people like in prison that were mass murderers or serial killers, or people that have clearly no regard for human life. Then they had all these like tests. They wanted like, all right, we want a baseline brain. So they would do they would just get volunteers and scans and everything. And then he was going through all these scans and he found one from the test group. Like, oh, this person's a sociopath. And it turned out it was his own brain.
Oh no!
Wow.
Oh, so I think I have heard that.
He's doing this research. He's like, I am.
Oh boy!
But then it kind of enters the nature nurture debate. So by nature, he's got the same brain structure as a killer.
Yeah.
But because he grew up in a happy, healthy home, he's got a great job. He's able to kind of do the things he wants to do in life in general. He's an interesting work. He's highly educated. He just never had to scratch that itch of going on a killing spree. Instead he's just doing research based essentially on himself. But there's a picture of his brain and the control. So for those of you listening, it's a scan of two different brains, and the one on top, you can see there's a lot more dark or activity up at the front part of the brain. On Jim's, it's kind of like doesn't look as healthy, and that's the part of the brain that controls empathy and sympathy, kind of connections for other people. Yeah. So he's looking at this control brain.
Not so much.
He's looking at himself, kind of not good.
Not the brain of a sweetheart.
James Fallon.
Alcohol doesn't cause strokes, right?
It certainly does. Yep. Actually, I have.
It's probably.
I have here for you actually some stats on that.
Yeah, I bet you would.
Because this jumped out to me pretty quick. Let's see here. Heavy alcohol use, more than 1 to 2 drinks a day. Check. Increases the risk of stroke by 69% in people who haven't had a stroke.
Wow.
Excessive drink can also increase your blood pressure.
Shit.
Moderate alcohol use defined as 2 drinks a day for men and 1 drink a day for women may actually help protect against it. See, this is the shit I hate.
I know. What is that driven by? Is it actual...
Tell me this in bottles of wine. How many...
Yeah. How many bottles of wine can I have?
Any more than that.
But is this another thing that's driven by industry? Just like milk, got milk, huge campaign when, there's tons and tons of data showing that can have a very negative effect on you, that it can actually cause osteoporosis.
I have a feeling, my gut reaction to this kind of thing, is it's probably not true for everyone. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that there's a much larger genetic component to, one person who has 5 drinks a day, nothing's going to happen.
There's tons of people that live into their 90s and have drink every day.
But it's like they say, if you're predisposed to lung cancer, you might get lung cancer. But if you're predisposed to lung cancer and you smoke, you're getting lung cancer.
Oh yeah, for sure. Pretty much for sure.
And the other people who aren't going to get lung cancer naturally, they smoke forever, never develop lung cancer. Mm-hmm. And then those are the outliers, so
Right.
you can't really take the exception to the rule and make it the rule.
Right.
But that's kind of where my brain goes with the 2 drinks a day for men and 1 drink a day for women may actually help protect against stroke, but not for everyone, probably.
Right.
It'd be surprising to me if that was
potentially
universally true.
It's good for your cardiovascular system, increases blood flow, but then there's a hard drop off after 2, and then you increasingly get more and more at risk after that.
I think in this situation too, there are larger substance abuse issues rather than stroke when it comes to alcohol.
That could be true.
Like I'm more concerned about being an alcoholic than I am about my drinking causing a stroke.
You stopped drinking for a while.
Yeah.
After.
Yeah. It was mainly just
was that an advice to you, or is that a personal?
I think it was just kind of personal. Like everything was dizzy as it was.
Right. I don't need to.
So I didn't really need to
spin
get
that top some more.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, I'm already pretty, imbalanced as it is. Yeah. So drinking didn't really help that out a whole lot.
So how does that affect you now? Are you more self-conscious about it? Do you really take stock if you do imbibe? Does it feel differently to you?
At this point, no. Like, I think everyone who drinks a lot kind of gets tipsy,
Well, yeah. That's how it works.
So that kind of how alcohol works in general, I think. My balance is fairly good now. I don't really know.
So you don't have that kind of, the same kind of paranoia that you had in the immediate aftermath?
Yeah, no. But I mean, there's the other, as you get older too, and you're kind of like, I don't need to party like I used to, like, like maybe just having a couple of beers is good, so I think I kind of drink more for taste now than to, just, well, let's party, woo.
Yeah.
How about psychologically? How many times a day do you think about having a stroke? Or times a week? Or, how much of your thinking capacity does a stroke occupy?
It's actually quite often. And maybe not daily, but some days it's like often. Because I'll have my bad days where it's like things just feel off. And
is it because of that?
Yeah, it's like, well, what's going on? And I kind of have to take self-inventory of myself and kind of know, what's going on. They kind of gave me a lot of like advice. You can kind of do this thing with your fingers where you play with your fingers and make sure your body still has its dexterity that you would expect, because that's obviously a sign that something's going wrong. Yeah. So I've done that every once in a while, like, is something amiss?
Yeah.
It's funny that's a thing for hypothermia as well.
Oh, really?
If you can touch your thumb to your pinky, if you can't do it, time to get warm.
Huh.
Time to
warm.
It's a good little test to just kind of test your dexterity and make sure that everything's working as you would expect it to.
Darren and I recently, since we revived this show, we've gone with the model of, we have our list of topics, but he'll choose one independently and then tell me when we start recording. So it's unplanned for me. But for this, obviously, because we were getting you, we chose it ahead of time. So it's been on my mind. But even outside of that, I still think about it quite often, especially because of you. And anytime there's like a sensation of numbness or just general unease in my body or my brain, a stroke comes to mind.
Yeah, and it's crazy too, because I think the public in general is not educated at all in both stroke and heart attack. People will like be having
Very
a heart
surface
attack.
Level.
People are having a heart attack on the street, and people won't even react. People will be like, "What the fuck's wrong with this guy?" and like step over him. It's like he's having a heart attack, dude. He needs to go to the hospital. Yeah. So it's really interesting how people are just very self-centered and they just don't have the education, I think, to recognize it. I had one.
People
and I didn't recognize
don't want
it,
to assume the worst. I think in general.
Yeah,
they don't
it's
really
probably a safer assumption to assume that someone's crazy than they're having a medical issue.
They don't really want to confront the worst of our biology.
And the person who's having it can't even, like, in some cases in stroke, they can't even tell you that they're having a stroke, even if they knew it. And that's what's like crazy about that gal's TED Talk.
Yeah.
When my grandmother had a stroke, it happened while she was sleeping, I think. So she woke up and like her husband just got up and was getting coffee and he was like, "Come on, get out of bed." and she was still just lying there. And like I think the stroke it hit her on the right side of the brain. So essentially just a line straight down her body. She lost all motor function on the left side of her body. Then he called the doctor and stuff. But at that point, it probably been 8 hours, since that had happened. And she couldn't even talk or anything because it just affected her.
Did they deduce how long your stroke actually lasted?
From a timeline perspective, I think the vessel broke, or the dissection happened, and then a blood clot started to form. And most likely, I'm assuming that the blood clot tore in the morning or something, and it took a while to build up. I don't really know how long that took. But then when that sucker dislodged and went into my cerebellum, that's when I felt it. Right. So once that thing got lodged in there and prevented blood to getting to part of my brain, that's when you actually start to feel it.
Was it essentially a TIA? Like then the clot broke apart?
Yeah, so the clot formed in down here in my neck, and then it traveled along until it kind of hit because it
narrows.
Yeah, it narrows as it goes into the brain, and so it kind of got as far as it could and went doop, and just stopped all blood going much further into that area, the cerebellum there.
But then what happened at that point? That clot is still there now.
Yeah, so that clot's still there. That part of your brain is now dead. So to say how long did it take? It's kind of odd because it's
been 6 years.
Yeah,
I mean, when does a stroke end? What is the end of the stroke? What determines that?
Well, I kind of think when your brain starts to stop swelling, when you've kind of stabilized, I guess is the best way to put it. And
so for you,
and then you're kind of on
days.
Yeah, 2 to 3 days. Well, probably a week actually, because there was 2 to 3 days of not knowing what was going on. Then when there was 5 days before I got discharged,
there must have still been swelling in there as well.
Yeah, I think you have to wait for that swelling to end. And there's the clot gets stuck, and then tissue starts to die, and then that takes a while to happen. It's not super fast.
But in the morning, you didn't have that womp womp womp, the far away and the mix up, or did you? At least not to that degree.
It wasn't like that later on. Like that was, I think, when it first started happening, it was the weirdest. But then as it progressed, I think it just turned into pain, and I couldn't keep any food down, and I was just dizzy. And that's, I mean, I think people might think that that's a different condition, doctors especially might, and even the neurologist that ended up treating me at the hospital, he was like, yeah, it's really hard to figure this all out, especially with a younger patient.
Mm-hmm.
But he said he made a phone call over to the other hospital to let them know what happened and to educate them. Yeah, because he's actually,
I'd be so pissed.
My doctor was one of the top neurologists in, I think, the West Coast. So awesome. I got a really good doctor, and he was actually, I think, on a Blazer game 6 months later. They had talking about the whole FAST thing, which is the National Stroke Association mantra for people to recognize it and whatnot. So it was kind of cool, I guess, in a way.
I was really upset actually at the time with people that just sent you home. That was
me too.
So fucked.
Me too. But they were doing their job. I mean, I think it was just a hard thing to diagnose,
Yeah, it is. But if you were describing to them what you just described to us, why would that be the flu?
I think I could describe it to you guys much better now than when I was in the state of mind that I was in.
And maybe you were nervous.
And I think too, a stroke. I'm sure they took your blood pressure and all that stuff too. So if your blood pressure was really low, then all right, we're starting to rule out stroke. And if you had the unicorn kind of stroke that.
Yeah, I don't think they ever even thought stroke to begin with to even rule it out. You know what I mean? It never even crossed their mind.
If you came in and your blood pressure was 250 over 180, and you were I'm dizzy and don't have good balance. All right, this is there's a connection here between that. There could definitely be a stroke going on here. But if it's super low, if your cholesterol's low.
Yeah, and I think part of the game.
And you're 20. You were 28.
Yeah, I was young and I was in pretty good shape at the time. Yeah. And I think part of the game too is, if a doctor orders an MRI, they kind of have to prove to the insurance companies why they did what they did to get paid. So I don't think they actually had a justification. So that probably has to go through the doctor's minds. And
I think also too, just in general, you don't want to just keep doing things. The more you the deeper you look into something, or like the further you get, you might just be muddying the waters too. So I think that in general they want to be just as simple and straightforward as they can, and not just like, okay, so you're dizzy. This could be literally anything. Let's run a test for everything. I think that it would take months to kind of work through everything.
Yeah, and I think they kind of have to make guesses at some point, and then they have to use process of elimination to try to rule things out. I mean, it could have been the flu.
Yeah,
but
that would have been some spectacular flu.
I'm pretty sure I would have never went to the ER for a flu.
Right.
I don't think I ever have, by the way.
Yeah, but I'm glad you didn't just accept that. Well, you didn't really have a choice. But
yeah, no, it was
eventually
it was pretty bad, and towards the end, I was hurting.
Yeah. So the less common of the two, do you know how much of the time those are fatal, or what's the difference in post-stroke life?
Again, that would really depend on where the clot is in the brain. I mean, if it's like one of the major arteries leading into the brain that just clogs up, even a giant clot that starts in the heart, comes in and shuts down an entire artery feeding. Yeah. I have a feeling that
most of the time
you're going to be dead. If it's a hemorrhagic stroke and it's large enough, you're just pumping blood. And I think, from a scenario standpoint, if you lived alone, you had a hemorrhagic stroke, and it was Friday night, you weren't expected back to work on Monday, I don't really see that going well. Or you surviving scary. That. So I think that it is really important. I think we've talked about recognize the symptoms, and that mantra of seconds count is really true. I can try to find like the actual statistics, but I think that it's more like the second stroke that might kill you.
Yeah, they actually say like the first one's like the warning sign.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the shot over the bow. Like the next one's going to be going to hurt. So that's actually what had me scared the worst, because like when you start reading all this stuff, you're like, I mean, obviously mine was a little bit different than most, but that still made me think a lot.
This just says 800,000 people experience a new or recurrent stroke. Up to 80% of strokes are preventable.
That is huge.
I think they say the same thing about heart attack too, right? Like,
yeah, and I think that
it's kind of, it's all the same thing. Yeah. I mean, it's one's in your brain and one's in your heart, but it's really caused by the same thing. That was one of the weirdest things to me. I was like, why don't they call it cardiovascular disease? Like, just blanket umbrella it and say, because if you were to lump those two together, holy crap, that's like, stroke is like, 1/5 of deaths, and then heart disease is
tougher.
Yeah.
Heart disease is number one.
Yeah. So if you combine those two together as cardiovascular problems,
very large.
That is a crazy amount.
A couple million just in the U.S. every year.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was gonna ask, what's the comparison with the U.S. to the rest of the world as far as the number of strokes per year? I bet it's a lot larger here.
Yeah.
Especially with our health epidemic of obesity and whatnot.
So I have some stats here. 140,000 people die each year from stroke. It's actually
a fairly small percentage.
Yeah, leading cause of serious long-term disability in the United States. Yeah, each year approximately 800,000 people suffer a stroke. So, under a quarter of people that have a stroke die from it. But I wonder how many of those were the second time. Yeah. Or just a massive hemorrhage.
Yeah.
Like you're.
How many of the French population have strokes when they're, drinking wine every day? It's just part of the culture.
Let's see.
Tons of bread and cheese.
How does like heart disease and automobile accidents, how do those like line up? Do you know?
Automobile accidents, like 30,000 people die a year.
Is that it?
That's it? Wow. Way more.
It's probably a lot more survivability in that than.
And I think that even in that, it's mostly people not paying attention. It's not like my tires fell off my car when I was doing it. It's not like
I was texting someone.
I hit a pedestrian and the pedestrian died.
Jeez,
or
that's how you do it.
Someone was drunk and it's not.
Somebody had more than
95% preventable, pretty much.
Yeah,
it was
just a straight up accident.
Got some, let's see, I can get some stats of cardiovascular disease in Europe, I think. Just give me one sec.
Good.
Causes of death.
Live research.
France, we got 142,000.
Strokes?
Just deaths from cardiovascular disease. Here we go. The incidence, prevalence, and mortality of stroke in France, Germany, Italy, Spain, the UK, and the US. This looks like it is complicated. I don't know if I can do this live. Yep.
This is a bunch of shit.
Or stroke death rate by country. This could be simple.
There you go.
Okay, so
simple enough.
Death rate per 100,000. So they broke this down a little bit. Number 1, Indonesia, 200 deaths per 100,000. To give you a little bit, let me find the United States.
USA.
We're looking good.
USA.
United States, 25.
Out of 100,000? What's going on in Indonesia?
For deaths, I don't know. Russia, 188.
Whoa.
Huh.
Now, these are strokes in occurrence or in death?
These are death rate per 100,000.
So we're just very resilient.
So we have 140,000 deaths per year in the United States.
Yeah.
It goes into 350 million. Does that make sense? 25.
Math? Really?
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. That sounds about right.
Sure.
Close enough. I'm trying to find. We're actually
That's amazing.
we're pretty good here. We're 167th on the list
What?
out of 172 countries represented here.
Wow.
In cases of death from a
In
stroke.
cases of death, yeah.
That's very interesting.
The
Is it
only
because we have better
France is
healthcare services?
168. They're better than us.
I knew it.
So they have 24 deaths per 100,000. So keep eating that cheese and
gulping that wine.
bread and
You'll be fine.
pull that cork.
Only 25 out of 100,000. It's great odds.
Most of the countries that are in the red are third world developing countries for sure.
It's because what are you going to do?
Probably don't have, like, if they do have a stroke there, they probably
You're
can't
probably
get to a doctor.
Right. Toast, yeah.
It's going to swell up until you die.
See if there's
That's
any
awful.
any kind of surprises here. Kind of surprised that Egypt is at 122. Saudi Arabia 126. That's really surprising to me.
Yeah.
I feel like they have enough money,
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure that some people there have a lot of money.
Yeah.
And then,
Highly concentrated.
yeah. What else?
I think you and I get self-conscious about topics that seem very, very large and hard to really boil down and still get the vast majority of the information. But when it comes to a stroke, it's pretty simple. The complications of a stroke can vary in intensity, but what a stroke is, it's really not.
It's not that complicated about like the what is going on here.
Yeah.
Like there's blood flow is stopped to your brain.
And your brain cells are going to die. But it's 80% of occurrences are preventable, then we should really be checking that out.
Diet, exercise.
Because strokes are fucked.
Well, yeah, and diet and exercise not only prevent stroke, prevent
all kinds
heart
of stuff.
Disease and
cancer.
Just your quality of life, I think, too. Like a lot of people, kind of see walking around in public and like they're having a hard time just walking around. It's like,
right.
If these guys probably ate better.
Something's going to happen.
And exercised a little bit more, they wouldn't be huffing and puffing. Life would be probably more enjoyable for them.
Yeah. And I think, too, I want to live as long as possible, but I don't want to have a stroke when I'm 50, like my grandmother did, or she was late 50s. In the last 25 years of her life,
oh, wow.
It was just like the slow slide,
Yeah.
So whatever I can do to, or even if I have a stroke, because it that's a red flag because there's a family history there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's like I want to be able to bounce back.
Being able to recognize.
I want to be able to come on a podcast and talk about it.
Right.
And, at least, that's really great that all things considered, it doesn't seem to have affected you. I would never know.
Right.
There's no indication of like a slurred speech or.
It's really just sometimes you feel a little bit off balance.
Mm-hmm. Yep, pretty much.
And your awareness of that is probably way higher.
Oh yeah, I'm super aware of it.
Yeah.
I used to have really, really good balance. I did, motorcycles, and started riding motorcycles since I was like 7. I skateboarded, do jiu-jitsu, which requires a crap load of balance.
Mm-hmm.
When you are training now, do you say no chokes?
That's kind of what I did actually for the first 6 months.
Yeah.
My instructor was super cool about it and just kind of told other people like, hey, lay off the chokes on Neil.
Yeah.
And
all the arm bars you want, but
yeah. So actually it's kind of funny. Now I literally give people my arm because I'm like, I would much rather get choked or get arm barred than choked.
Yeah.
And I just tap early now, I'm not 20, when I was doing this. And so like my pride, I don't have that much of it anymore. Like I'm not going to be fighting anymore. I'm not going to be like, fighting in the cage next week or whatever.
Anything to prove.
Don't have anything to prove. I'm kind of, older now. And so it's kind of like, whatever, you tap out, like learn something from it.
I'll boost your ego.
I kind of like in my head too, I just mentally think like, oh, I've already lost if you've got my back and you've got your hand around my neck. Like I've already kind of lost the fight here. Like what caused it to get there anyway?
Right.
For the first 6 months, I was like kind of weary of it. But then after, I'm not too worried about it. But yeah, I do definitely give people my arm or like a leg or like anything to not get choked.
Yeah.
I'd much rather them go for that. And I've actually gotten really good at like getting people to try to armbar me and getting out of it.
I think that when it comes to prevention of this kind of stuff, we really have to take it into our own hands and use our own common sense, because there's a war between industry and health, really. When you've got fast food joints, one after another, and a medical industry that thrives on sick people. So they're only going to do so much to keep you not, barreling straight into death, but sickness is profitable. So prevention, you can only rely on studies and statistics so much. It is valuable, but definitely consider where this information is coming from.
Yeah, the fast food chains don't care about your health. They care about your dollar.
They'll use the cheapest ingredients, whether or not they're going to contribute to your detriment or not.
Yeah. It's totally your responsibility.
Yeah. I know it tastes good, but it doesn't taste that good.
A lot of places don't have like a decent place to eat that isn't fast food.
Oh yeah, I've driven across country and I've been to pretty much every state, and you pretty quickly
definitely droughts
you
of
get
nutrition.
Into oh cool, iceberg lettuce again. And
just douse it in
ranch dressing, and that's a salad, basically. There's nothing in this. There's like no
maybe some stale croutons on there.
I mean, there's no nutritional value. Yeah. This is just like crunchy leaf and then sugar dressing. Like, that's basically it.
Sugar fat.
It's crazy too if you think about like, stroke and heart attacks are totally preventable due to lifestyle changes.
For the most part, yeah.
Well, it's not your doctor's responsibility to say, were you exercising this week? And then people go to the doctor and then they're like, yep, they checked everything out. I'm good. And then they are like, okay, I'm going to go eat bacon
doing whatever
and
I want.
Eat whatever I want and do whatever I want. And it's like, you got to have some personal accountability for it.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I was going to say is throughout that whole experience, what I really learned was you got to advocate for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I think about is like, if I would have spoke up more, when I got discharged, like, no, that's not right. Like, you
doesn't
guys,
feel right.
This doesn't feel right. I was so out of it, I couldn't really argue.
Yeah,
but like,
it's hard.
It's something in the back of my mind that I always think about. Like, man, had I would have, like advocated more for myself, would my prognosis be better? I don't know.
And like you said, when you got with that doctor and you had the sense of competence and that you could trust what he was doing, that's completely invaluable. Still, that's an all too common occurrence that somebody's dismissed and their situation diminished when it is it could be grave. And I wouldn't want to be the person who told somebody they had the flu and they really had a stroke and then that person died because they didn't get the help they needed.
That's crazy too. Like, I think for doctors, the number one cost for them is malpractice insurance.
I bet. Yeah.
Because people will sue you if you screw up, like. They're really trying to help people,
Of course.
At the end of the day, I think most doctors go into that profession to help people.
It's just frustrating.
So it's, I think it's frustrating on all accounts. Like I'm sure most doctors, when they discharge a patient and they miss something, probably kick themselves.
Yeah, you do want, of all things, you want that kind of thing to be perfect, and it's just not.
Yeah, I think that it just comes back to they don't have a perfect picture of human anatomy and health in general. It's not like, well, get them in the scanner, we'll figure out exactly what is going on. And I think that medicine is more subjective than we want to think it is.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bias that goes on too, even with like doctors. Like doctors will like see somebody come in, maybe, they look like they live a certain lifestyle. They kind of assume, like, even if they're not trying to do it, bias just happens.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually funny. There was IBM's Watson computer, ran through a bunch of charts, medical things, and it like out-diagnosed, I think it was like a cancer study.
Really?
They out-diagnosed most doctors. Like it's crazy. Like just because the computer, it's programmed in a way to do it very programmatically and systematically. So it's better to diagnose patients through a computer.
It's also pulling from a data set that is billions of times bigger than any doctor is going to have
so
time.
All the data.
Exactly. So like a doctor's seen 1,000 patients in this particular profile, maybe, and Watson's seen 1 million or 1 billion, globally. Yeah. So there's so much crazy stuff,
Just data. Yeah.
What about that data?
I love it. Love data.
I freaking love data.
Oh my God. Give me that.
Do we need anything else?
I feel pretty good. I'm glad you're okay.
Oh, thank you.
Glad you survived and you're...
Me too.
Yeah. Able to come in and share your story.
Thank you. This is great.
Nice, I think, PSA. Pay attention to it. It's not an age-related phenomenon. It's not something that is just going to affect your grandparents. Anyone, anytime.
No one's safe.
No one's safe. So sleep well with that in mind. Yeah.
Just be good to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Pay attention.
Another part of that, we just did this at our house because my wife and I do have a baby. We put up a list of like emergency numbers on our fridge, and also the address to the house.
Oh yeah.
As part of that, just if it's not someone in your family that is trying to call, maybe there's a list of your doctor, like your actual doctor.
Oh, that's great.
Everything, and then also it just says I'm at this address.
Yeah.
I think that's a good thing to do.
Yeah, definitely.
On that topic, it's also really important that your address is well visible from the street, because when the firefighter comes or a police, firefighter, ambulance comes,
first response,
they can't find your house. They can't help you.
Yeah. If you're missing a number, don't just
it'll be
don't
fine.
Put it off.
Yeah,
it's kind of a big deal sometimes.
It could be.
Yeah.
Man. Did I tell you that I booked a doctor's appointment?
No.
Really? Yeah. After the chemotherapy.
Oh, yeah. So, you were pretty sure that you were fucked.
I might still be. I haven't gone yet. But yeah, so who knows? Maybe...
Can't wait to find out how you're doing.
What kind of cancer I have, what stage.
How long we have
to do the fundamentals. We'll have to really ramp up production.
We
if that's
got to
the
get
case.
some
do every
some
day.
content.
Yeah. You can start
stock
really
up the content.
Be 2037.
Yeah.
He's been dead for
He's still
20
with us.
years, but
It's like Elron.
yeah. Well, I'm Darren McCarthy.
I'm Dan Fury.
And I'm Neil Hunt.
And this has been The Fundamentals.